That was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. It is an honor. It is an honor to be here amongst my friends. I'm really looking forward to some reason-infused energy. And I'm going to talk about misinformation. You guys have been talking about it for days, I'm sure. It really is, I think, one of the defining issues of our time, and it is doing great harm. But there is an interesting element. I've been studying misinformation for decades, and people often ask me, what's different about today? And I do think it's the ideology element. We're seeing ideology play a bigger and bigger role in the spread of misinformation and in the belief of misinformation, that embrace of misinformation. Yes, I know ideology has always been part of conspiracy theories. It's always been part of misinformation. But we really are starting to see it shift a little bit. Now, I do most of my work in the health space. And just think about how this evolution has played out here. If you think about alternative medicine and unproven therapies, for a very long time, it had this kind of counterculture vibe, right? It was, new agey. And I think it's fair to say largely, not entirely, resided on the left, right? Then you move forward a little bit and it becomes a little bit more corporate, a little bit more commercial, a little bit more about spandex, and it is more individualistic in tone, right? Move forward a little bit more. Yeah. You have my friend Dr. Oz, and you see sort of this normalization, right? This legitimization of misinformation, of unproven therapies. It's kind of, at this time in his illustrious career, you could almost argue he was kind of middle America. I know he doesn't reside there anymore, but we're starting to see this shift. And then, of course, you have the rise of no introduction required, right? You have the rise of the celebrity wellness gurus, like my friend Gwyneth, jade vagina eggs, vagina candles. And we have moved from Gwyneth's vagina, right, to Tucker's testicles. This is a remarkable shift. It really is. Did everyone remember this story, right? This is the idea, Tucker Carlson telling people that we need more real men, right? Real men, and one way to get that is to tan your testicles, right? So that not only is this absurd, but what an incredible shift where you have the wellness, misinformation, alternative universe increasingly residing on the right. And not only is that shift interesting, the degree to which ideology is part of the message is absolutely fascinating. And then you have, some people who are explicitly ideological about it. I mean, there's been so much misinformation. Did you guys hear this story? When I first saw this headline, I thought it was satire. I didn't think it was real. This is a real headline. So you have, a former national security advisor, suggesting that the government is putting vaccines in salad dressing. I mean, it's so absurd. It doesn't make any scientific sense at all. It would not work, right? Everyone knows Americans don't eat salad. And then, of course, it is all absurd, right? But the reality is it's doing incredible harm, right? This quote seems like hyperbole, seems like it's over top, but I don't think it is. I think there's good empirical evidence to back up this reality, right? That misinformation is causing or contributing to the erosion in life expectancy in the United States. And as you guys probably know, the dive has been pretty incredible over the last couple of years. But not only are entities like the FDA recognizing this, you're seeing international organizations recognize this. Increasingly, the average person is recognizing this. This is something we study at our institute. It hasn't always been this way, you guys. You guys know this, right? You guys follow this. But now we see, a majority of people recognize misinformation as a huge problem, as this quite recent survey highlights. Look at this survey. This one came out just a few months ago. 5%. Just 5%. This is a big survey in 19 countries. Just 5% of those people say misinformation, not a problem. And as you can see, the majority of people see the spread of misinformation as a serious issue, right? A major threat, right up there with climate change. So this is where we are right now. So I want to talk about a couple of these themes and how they relate to ideology. And the first thing I want to point out is what I'm talking about is misinformation, right? We're seeing this fascinating rhetorical game playing out in pop culture right now where they're saying that this isn't misinformation, this is about freedom of expression, this is about don't censor us. It's complete nonsense. First of all, it is misinformation, clearly misinformation, what we're talking about. And secondly, despite what this, this politicization of this debate, you aren't being silenced. And we've done research on this. That is not the problem. The problem is not the silencing of misinformation, it's the spread of misinformation. And by the way, they're often complaining about being silenced and canceled while they're sitting on the most popular show on cable right now. Or they're talking to the world's most popular podcaster and talking about, I should be so silenced, right? I love it. But the idea that their misinformation or lies exist is important. There are things that are wrong and there are things that are correct. And I think that this billion-dollar verdict highlights that, reminds us of that. There are things that are lies. There are things that just aren't true. And that's really what we're talking about in this space. This is also true about health misinformation. This was a nice piece that was in the New England Journal of Medicine in May. They make this point much more eloquently than I just did. And they point out, look, yeah, science is hard, right? It evolves. But there are things that are clearly wrong. And that's really what we're talking about this space. And that's the kind of stuff that has been made ideological. So what kind of stuff am I talking about? Well, look at this data, right? So this is Canadian data for you guys. We're supposed to be sensible in Canada. This is a reasonable country. No, we're not. No, we're not. So this is you can see it came out in June. Again, a fairly big, a nice, robust survey. I know it's inherently flawed methodology, but this is a good group. And I think the data is important. Right? This isn't in the teeth of the pandemic, right? This is fairly recently. And look at the beliefs here, you guys. Again, this is in reasonable Canada. The first one, COVID vaccines have killed many people. No, they haven't. There's no evidence to support that at all, and it's been covered up. And you look, only 56% of Canadians are willing to say that's not true. Then look at the last one there. COVID was caused by 5G technology, completely absurd. Again, scientifically implausible idea, and you look at the number, a quarter of Canadians are at least open to that idea, right? And then, of course, the middle one. I'm obsessed. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. This is a hardcore conspiracy theory, right? The idea that Bill Gates started the pandemic in order to force vaccination so he could put microchips in all of us. Never mind, we all carry around supercomputers. Bill's probably following us right now. Look at the percentage of Canadians open to that idea, right? So this is the normalization of misinformation. It's not just individuals that seem like they're on the fringe anymore. We have seen a legitimization of conspiracy theories and misinformation, not just in the political space, not just with the big lie, but also increasingly in the health space. Now, to be fair, Bill Gates did say he ran out of microchips. I'm just asking questions, you guys. I'm just asking questions. But it is ridiculous right now when you think about, and again, this is a place I've lived for decades, following this kind of misinformation, when we have stories like this playing out. I'm also obsessed with the Ivermectin story. Everyone here knows that when I say the word Ivermectin, you know what I'm referring to, right? Yeah. If you could get in a time machine and go back 2 years, or 2.5 years, and tell yourself, there's this drug, Ivermectin, it's going to become an ideological flag. I mean, how would you even explain that, right? But look at this. So this was a Google Trends search I did, and you can see this is people searching for the word Ivermectin, and you can see in July it just spikes, right? It just spikes. So these are individuals interested in Ivermectin. That data is important, by the way, because right around that time, we're starting to get good clinical trials that tell us ivermectin doesn't work. There's a Cochrane collaboration, systematic review, comes out, says it doesn't work in the context of COVID. Despite that, you see this spike, right? And it really does become an ideological flag. And I just don't mean that figuratively. I mean that literally. This was a picture my brother took for me in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. A guy's got an Ivermectin flag in his car. He's driving around proudly, supporting Ivermectin. It is amazing, that shift that we've seen in this context. And some of the news about ivermectin is so absurd. Is this satire? Is this real? So in Canada, people are sneaking ivermectin into the hospital in stuffies, right? Because it's not used in Canada. This looks vaguely pornographic, by the way, so we'll move on. Then you have QAnon telling parents to give their kids ivermectin, completely ridiculous. This story is amazing. Did you guys see this one? So this is a person running for Attorney General in Wisconsin. She didn't make the platform. She didn't get past the primaries, but she got 30% of the votes. So we're not talking fringe candidate gets 1 or 2% of the votes. She got 30% of the votes. And one of the goals and her major platform of her campaign was she was going to arrest all the physicians that didn't give ivermectin to their patients for murder, right? This is where we are from an ideological perspective. And then you have the tweet from the FDA, which I actually love. You're not a horse, you're not a cow. Seriously, I'll stop it. Not everyone liked that tweet, by the way. Joe Rogan didn't like it. Some people thought it was glib. The FDA shouldn't be. I just totally disagree. We've got to make good, shareable, science-informed content, right, that can have an impact. So I love this. I'd like to see more of this kind of stuff. And of course, the ivermectin story isn't going away. Now these individuals are suggesting ivermectin for long COVID. I do think it's funny, though. There's a little bit of an irony here. Often it's the exact same community that said COVID's not real. Okay, it's kind of real, but we need to use ivermectin, not vaccines. Okay, COVID was real, and now you have long COVID. Buy my ivermectin for your long. It's bizarre, the conceptual inconsistency there. And yes, so many unproven therapies rolling out, right? The vile Alex Jones pushing, did you guys hear about this? Drinking urine for COVID. By the way, urine had a really big couple of years, right? People are drinking, they're drinking their own urine, they're drinking dog urine. Have you heard about this, right? Yeah, they're drinking cow urine. Yeah, so urine, if you bought urine stocks, good for you, you're ahead of the curve. But the reason I raise that is you're seeing this ideological component to health misinformation, seep from, it's not just about vaccines anymore. It's not just about COVID anymore. It's about supplements. It's really about the entire wellness industry. The other thing I think it's really important to emphasize here is, obvious conclusion number 2, it is about social media. Social media has played such a huge role here. Again, this is something that we study at our institute. Just huge. You guys know that already, but I think it's important to emphasize that because there is a huge ideological component to that. So this is just one of many studies. As you guys know, there's a rich body of evidence now on this, looking at it from, it's hard to study well, right? Correlation, causation, observational studies, but we've looked at this from a bunch of different methodological directions now. And if you get your information from social media, more likely to believe misinformation, more likely to spread misinformation, right? And this is just one study of many that highlights this. It's a very recent one, too, in September. There's this very interesting analysis that was reported in the New York Times that came out, again, just weeks ago. Very, very interesting. Again, highlighting how bad it is out there. You guys don't need to be reminded of this, but it's good to remind you of this. A well-crafted lie gets more engagement than the truth. And you guys know this already. And part of that, of course, is because increasingly that lie has an ideological component to it. This was an interesting study that came out again this year that really emphasizes that. Again, got to be careful not to overinterpret this kind of data, correlation, causation. But I think the outcomes speak to what the researchers were looking at, and that is this creation of echo chambers that social media in our current media environment encourages, right? So basically, no surprise to you guys, if you are anti-vax, you get your information from very particular sources, right? If you're pro-vax, you get your information from other sources. Generally, in this study, they found the legacy media. But you can see that list of of anti-vax sources doesn't surprise anyone in this room. Am I right? It's funny because I talk to other audiences and I ask them, have you ever heard of Natural News? And do not go to that website is always my conclusion. But the interesting thing is almost all of those sources, some of them are general like YouTube, but almost all of those sources have an ideological component to them, right? Have an ideological component to them. And we have a lot of other studies that talk about this. This was a study that came out just last week, I think it came out last week. Same conclusion, no surprise, right? That Fox, if you get your news, and I feel like I'm picking on Fox News, do I want to say sorry about that? Fox, you're more likely to be vaccination hesitant. Again, correlation, causation, there's a lot of variables going on there, but this fits with other data, right? Do you guys hear about this study? This is a fascinating, it's a hilarious study, I think. Basically what they did is they paid Fox News fans to watch CNN. I mean, it's a cynical, everyone involved in that study knew what was going on. You're just paying me to watch Don Lemon. This isn't going to work. It's ridiculous. But it did work. It did work. It worked on every metric that the researchers were looking at. So this is good news, right? It talks about breaking that echo chamber, exposing people to other perspectives, can have an impact. Now, to be fair, they went back to Fox News and their opinions went back. But it's still just a ray of light on how we can move forward. The other thing I think is important to emphasize here, and I've already said it a whole bunch of times, it really is ideology. Again, I've been following this for decades, and I can't believe the degree to which it's become about ideology. This is a piece I did for NBC where I really tried to map out, why is this the case? Why has ideology become such a big theme? Well, first of all, unfortunately, it works. It does work as a strategy, and there's a really interesting body of research that touches on it, and I hyperlink to a lot of those studies in this piece. But what happens is people come, and this happened during the counterculture year, early 70s, late 60s, same phenomenon, right? You come for the ideological spin. There's something about that community that you're attracted to. Perhaps there is a completely legitimate, interesting ideological position that you find intuitively appealing, freedom, whatever it is. You come to the group for that ideological spin, and then you stay despite the science-free lunacy. And we're seeing that again and again and again. It plays out. There's this basket of beliefs that you have to adopt if you're part of that community. And I want to emphasize here, pause, because I have been picking on the right already. You guys know this. This happens across the ideological spectrum, right? I am picking on the right at this moment, but it does happen across the ideological spectrum. The best example, of course, is anti-GMO rhetoric, right? This largely resides on the left, although that's starting to change too. We're starting to see an interesting evolution for that argument, but this does happen across the ideological spectrum. So we have to be, appreciate that before going forward. But yeah, right now, there is a rich body of evidence that tells us this is largely, not entirely, but largely happening on the right, or at a minimum on the extremes, on the political extremes. And of course, social media, as I was talking about earlier, facilitates this. Lots of studies back this up. Some of our own work has found, debates about hydroxychloroquine on social media were almost entirely political in nature, right? They weren't about the science. And this was like when the hydroxychloroquine battle was playing out. Lots of studies have talked about the degree to which the social media misinformation around COVID and vaccines and other related topics largely comes from the conservative side of the equation. This is another very recent study, also very, very interesting, and they found, by a huge margin, conservatives more likely to share misinformation online. I thought this was a really clever study because they compared sort of left conspiracy theories versus right conspiracy theories and watched how they played out. And by a huge margin, it happens more on the right. Look at this fascinating Gallup poll. Came out relatively recently that backs up this fascinating migration that has happened in this space. So just look at, this is, do you have confidence in science? right? You look, 1975, 63% of Democrats said that. And you can see 1965, more Republicans trusted science, right? Look at it now, right? It's flipped and it's become more polarized. Think back to those images, I talked about before, the counterculture to Tucker's testicles, and then look at this, right? It all fits together. It is a fascinating shift. And of course, this has dramatic consequences, real, measurable consequences, for example, on who's getting vaccinated, lots of studies. This was an analysis that came out last year that found that partisanship, like whether you're a Democrat or Republican, was the #1 predictor, more than race, age, education, access, #1 predictor of whether you're going to get vaccinated. And yes, this has even more measurable, really tangible impacts as this analysis. There's been a lot of studies that have shown this. Studies that show that if you are in a county that voted for Trump, more likely by hundreds of percentage points to use ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, and of course, scary headlines like this. So this really does matter. This data is fascinating. And I want to emphasize, because it's very controversial, I want to emphasize it has been replicated by other groups, findings very similar themes. This was a study done in, again, Canada. A friend of mine, Frank Graves, is the lead author of it. He works at Ecos Research. But basically what he found, and there's a lot of layers to this. What he found is if you are pro-vaccine, you're more likely to be pro-Ukraine. If you are unvaccinated, you're more likely to be pro-Russia, right? That's pretty dramatic, right? And we're not talking about, kind of similar. We're talking about dramatic differences. Again, all the caveats about the problem of survey research, all that. Look at these numbers. And Frank has a lot of these numbers. 88% of vaccinated people believe Russia is committing war crimes. Only 35% of unvaccinated believe it. That is a huge gap. And as I said, there's a lot of layers to this, right? Because that speaks to, again, the ideological component to it. If you are anti-vax, this is now something else that you're supposed to believe. And I know there are a lot of people in this room who probably get hate mail. I get so much hate mail. And all of my anti-vaxxers, anti-vax hate mailers, without exception, shifted to being pro-Russia, pro-Putin. Without exception, I'm doing sort of a soft study on this, you guys. I'm collecting all of my hate mail data. It's incredible. It's incredible. Just to give you one example, this was on my Twitter feed. This was, as you can see, shortly after the invasion of Ukraine. And these are two well-known anti-vaxxers. And Mark there, who usually rants at me about vaccines, is telling me how Putin's is not the bad guy. It's Ukraine. And by the way, there are biolabs in Ukraine, and that's really why Russia invaded. I mean, it's amazing. And Mark, it was funny because you know why he was so upset? He was upset that Putin lost his black belt. So yeah, the war criminal loses his black belt. That's what we should be worried about. Okay, so how do we respond to this? What can we do? What can we do? Fantastically complex, but I'm an optimist. I believe that research tells us we can. You guys, this community, we can make a difference. Yes, teaching critical thinking skills matters. You guys know that already. There's a lot of really interesting research. I like this study because it talks about even in extreme circumstances, where there's a lot going on, teaching critical thinking skills can make a difference. This was a terrific study that came out in June. People maybe recognize some of these authors, just a great group of scholars. And they actually explored what can we do to fight misinformation. And I like it because I totally agree with the conclusion. We have to come at it from absolutely every direction, right? We have got to regulate. So that means everything that falls under the umbrella of regulation, getting the social media platforms to do more, getting entities like FDA and FTC to do more. We need to nudge, right? Pre-bunk. We got to pre-bunk and we've got to nudge and we've got to debunk, right? And debunking does work, right? This is something I'm passionate about, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But the other thing we need to do is we need to get individuals from these communities. From the conservative community, we need to get individuals from religious communities to be leaders, to be leaders to try to move this forward. This is a piece that came out, as you can see, just really days ago. Again, two terrific scholars where they make that point. Now, it's very doubtful that Dr. Oz will do this. Maybe he will do it. But basically, they're arguing that if you can get voices like Dr. Oz, right, to speak to these issues, you can make a difference. And we saw that, by the way, with Trump getting vaccinated. There's data that shows. So this can make a difference. The other thing we need to do is we need to act quickly. So this was a study that we just published. It's one of our new studies that came out on Tuesday in JAMA Open, where we looked at monkeypox conspiracy theories and how fast they spread. And it's immediate, you guys. So we need to monitor the social media platforms and respond quickly before misinformation takes on an ideological valence. Now, I think we need more research on this strategy. There has been some interesting work with 5G technology, but this really can make a difference. And I think our study highlights how valuable speed, how important speed is in this space. Also, I gotta know, what's up with the car rants? All the TikTok, I swear to God, you guys, half of the TikTok videos are people driving, ranting into their phones. And yes, we've got to debunk. I know you guys do this already, and I know it doesn't feel like it works, but it does work. It really does work. I always say, look, imagine what the world would be like if we, our community, didn't debunk, right? Yeah, it's pretty terrible now, but it would be hugely worse if we weren't out there, if you guys weren't out there doing the good work. It does make a difference. It really does. This is a slide I use all the time. These are my favorite tips for what a good debunk looks like. Please take a picture of it. Maybe you've seen it before. Pass it along. Providing the good science does matter. Use clear, shareable content, like that FDA tweet. You're not a horse, you're not a cow. Number 4 is really, really important. You want to talk about the scientific consensus. What the body of evidence says. I think this is a really important point because it highlights how science is hard, right? It's not going to be one study. It's not going to be one preprint. It's not going to be one retracted study that you're still talking about. It's a body of evidence. And there has been studies that have pointed out if you talk about the scientific consensus, you're going to be viewed as more credible, you're going to have a bigger impact. Yeah, you want to be nice, you want to be humble, you want to be empathetic, you want to listen. That can be really, really hard, but I think the body of evidence tells us that matters. We have to use, and I know so many of you already do, we've got to use songs, we've got to use humor, we've got to use art, and we have to use stories and narratives to fight the bad information. And again, I think there's a growing body of evidence that tells us that matters, right? Point out those rhetorical tricks that are used to push misinformation, highlight, hey, that is just a story, that's just an anecdote. Make sure you make the fact the thing that people remember. And number 9, so important for all of our mental health, for our psychic energy, right, guys? Don't aim all your efforts at those hardcore deniers. Think about the general public. That's your target. That's your target, right? That's the group that we want to get to. And that's the group where I think we can make the biggest difference. This is our initiative to try to do this. It's called #ScienceUpFirst. I started it with Senator Stan Kutcher. He's a physician, now a senator in Canada. It's been, I like to say, tremendously successful. Over almost 1 billion interactions. We're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are trying to use evidence-based strategies to meet misinformation where it resides. And we use diverse voices, we use positive content, we have it independently vetted by experts. We're trying to make a difference. We'd love, I know some of you already are part of the team, we'd love to have everyone in this room to be part of the Science Up First team. And with that, you guys, I'm going to say thank you very, very much. It's great to see you. Go Science! Beautiful.